Welcome to the Agility in Real Life podcast, Take 5 in Real Life. Now your hosts, Mike Studeman, Jeff Lee, and Pat Campbell.
Hello, and welcome back to the Take 5 IRL podcast. I'm Jeff Lee, a partner at Agility IRL and one of your hosts.
And I'm Pat Campbell, another partner at Agility IRL, and looking forward to wrapping up this two-part story about that client in the medical device industry, Jeff. We started last time. Maybe you can refresh our memory on exactly what it was we talked about.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you don't know what we're talking about, I would definitely recommend going back, check out our the previous episode where we framed up to this case study. But if you don't want to do that and just get the Cliff Notes, kind of frame that up for you. So last year we worked with the client, medical device industry. They had been working in waterfall ways, but they were having a number of problems with that, wanted to move to Agile. They brought us in. We helped train them up on a variety of things at the team level, at the leadership level. We trained them up on how to better get their QMS aligned with Agile delivery. And we got into coaching, making this stuff real. And so we were going to kind of continue the story here in this episode and talk about how that coaching went and what that progress was like, starting with their first sprint. So yeah, Pat, what were some of the key things that stood out to you?
Well, one of the things that stood out to me was the cultural change that needed to happen. I mean, they took to the training pretty well, the APS training that was really well received, as we talked about in the last episode. But when they got back to their desk and then tried to figure out, okay, how do we get this stuff going? They kept thinking, well, but what about this, which was, this cultural baggage that comes along? How do we easily change that and just switch to this, or what do we do? And so that's where the coaching came in. We could help them feel okay about, yeah, you can let that go. It's okay. That's not something that was necessary, or this is something we do different, and here's how. And if you think back to the training, yeah, here's what we taught in the training. Now here's how we're going to actually do it in real life and what it looks like. And so that that's why it always takes at least 3 sprints to really start to understand how to make it work. And so we saw that cultural shift going on, as we do every time when we're bringing along clients like this in those initial sprints.
Yeah, absolutely. And also it's developing the new cultural muscles, but also the new skills, right? We had people who were newly trained as product owners, newly trained as Scrum Masters. We're helping them to learn on the job as we're doing that. And so there was learning going on. And
That's
one of the
right.
things that stood out to me early on is this is a company that had a culture of, before you start doing the work, you need to have a pinpoint scope and date set. And we were changing the culture and letting them know that, and what they already knew is that in this complex environment, you can't realistically do that. And so we're working with them to accept that they don't want to lie to themselves anymore. And that's hard, right? I mean, they wouldn't frame it that way, but their leaders were struggling to not have both scope and date locked down. Once we got through a few sprints, we were able to put together a roadmap that was based on real data for how much we could get done. And they had enough time to work forward with the other things that were deemed in that first release in their agile way of working, so they could actually put something together. There was a lot of anxiety that was eased once that was put together, but that was hard for people to deal with that uncertainty. It's always uncertain, but
Yep.
seeing it on paper really helped, and seeing the data that helped inform it, that it wasn't just something that was made on estimates that haven't been proven at all. Definitely gave some more confidence. And to be honest, that initial roadmap held pretty true, even more than I would have expected it to for that young organization.
Yeah, and it wasn't just because it was based on real data, but based on reality, that you cannot predict the future. And so as you look farther out in the roadmap, it's lowering degrees of confidence, and that's okay. And that was antithetical to their culture, no question about it. There was another cultural switch too, and it comes from that industry they're in, the highly regulated medical device industry. And the fact that you take a worst case scenario approach to your quality systems in order to avoid getting the FDA down on your head. And so worst case scenario across the board is a very expensive way to run a company, especially when it wasn't necessary. And so, we go into things like, TIR 45. How do you actually do agile software development within that regulated environment and still get to done and still do a reasonable roadmap? And so that there's some deep-seated culture there, not just, oh, this is our QMS. No, it's how people have lived so long that they have to deal with.
Yeah. Yeah. There's so many directions I could go off of that comment because,
Mhm.
we were working with the quality and regulatory people to bring them along, and they were very interested, right? They
Yeah.
wanted this to go well. So
Yeah.
there was work we did to help them streamline their quality management system so they didn't have a lot of waterfall-like structure, you know, above what the FDA requires. FDA doesn't require waterfall. They just have certain things that they want, and companies a lot of times structure it in a waterfall way when they don't have to. So we help
Yeah.
them to streamline that a bit.
Yeah.
But yeah, we also, again, one of these management um, layers of apprehension was because it seemed to them like work was getting done really slowly. But part of that was because people were getting so much more done every sprint in terms of the
Hmm.
documentation, the testing, the peer reviews, like all of that was getting done every sprint. So there was less breadth they were working on, but the things they did work on got all wrapped up. So they got a lot more dependability, a lot more predictability from that.
Yeah, that's a great observation, Jeff, because um, that's a definite mind shift for leadership when what they're seeing and done is actually truly done as opposed to just superficially done.
Right.
Yeah. And then we started to introduce some new ideas as well. I mean, such a big part of this industry is documentation, right? And so not only getting the documentation done as a part of each sprint, as a part of the product, as a part of the sprint goal, but how do you start treating documentation as code? The more you can treat your infrastructure as code and your documentation as code, not just the software that's being developed, the more you can manage it with quality iteratively within the sprint. And so we actually worked with them to run a couple of experiments around building the code, building the documentation into the code and extracting it into, final form, and then updating it as you go, as you run further testing and learn more. And
Mhm.
uh, and so they after the cultural shift, they started to see opportunities for experimentation to streamline the process, which was fun to watch.
Yeah, one of the experiments that they ran, they were really embracing the idea of cross-functionality, like having people on teams who did more than just their specialty. And
Yeah.
so finding a balance of that took a little while. Initially, there were some of the teams who had a hard time getting out of their specialty and helping each other to get things done.
Mm.
Other teams took it, they swung the pendulum the other direction, where it's like, hey, we can all do everything, not quite to that extreme, but they were doing more trying to learn new skills, new languages while they were working. And what they found is they were not delivering as much as the business needed them to. So they had to
Yeah.
come back to center a little bit more as well. So there was learning as far as how do we push this boundary? How do we break down some silos? But we also need to be delivering while we do it.
Right. And in fact, we even lost a team member or two over the struggle with that concept of cross functionality. And instead of, oh, that person's the firmware guy or that person's the testing person,
Yeah.
how do we all contribute, even if it's in little areas where we're cross trained?
Yeah.
So why
And
don't
that's not
you?
totally
Oh,
I was just gonna say that's not totally unusual. Like we see that a lot
no.
when people get accustomed, they spend what, however long their career is, right, working in a certain way. A lot of people make that transition seamlessly. Some people really struggle, but they get there, and that's their new way of working. And other people just they that's not how they want to work every day, and that's okay.
Yeah.
But they realize that this isn't the culture that I want to be in anymore, right?
Yeah,
So
absolutely. And so that's why a big part of the work we do is change management. And we bring that to the table very early on and work out a plan for that. But maybe you can bring us home and kind of, share the good news of how things ended up. We've been letting them hang on, our listeners hang on as long as we can, I think. So.
yeah, so they found, and as we went back after we had left, after, for a while, we came back and said, okay, how are things going and what are you observing? Feedback we got was productivity went up. They were getting more done faster, and done, right? That whole definition of done.
Mhm.
One of the biggest things that they noted immediately was after they got to the end of their last sprint, the time to get to submission was something like a third of what it had been previously. I don't remember the exact number on that.
It was a third or a quarter. Yeah.
Yeah, it was much better. They talked about better communication in the organization as a whole as well, and so they saw results, as the bottom
Mhm.
line.
Yeah, they even caught some missteps early on. You had a story about one of the sprint reviews.
Oh
You could
yeah, big
share
one.
even there.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it was early on. So we were trying to, get more stakeholders come to sprint reviews, understand the value. We were doing some stakeholder training to help them with that. I think it was the third sprint review. One of the, kind of most important stakeholders for this whole product got there, and the product owners did a great job of outlining here are our priorities. We're this far along. This is what's coming next. And he's like, whoa, 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 wait, what? Why are you
Hmm.
doing that? And this thing that's the most important thing is number 7 on your list. I don't remember if it was
Hmm.
number 7 or not, but there was a total flip that happened. And he was like, no, we're working on the wrong thing. Why are you doing that? And the team explained, well, we talked to this person, this person. Well, some of those people weren't on the call. And so our powerful stakeholder said, I'm going to go talk to them. I'm going to get this figured out, and get back to you as soon as I can. And so it was within like a day or two, which is not normal for the speed of this company working. He had an answer. They totally changed their focus, right? And the initial response from some people is, "Oh no, how are we going to manage this communication that we were so off?" I'm like, manage it like it's a victory because it was. You learned something really important really early on that you didn't have
Absolutely.
that transparency for.
Absolutely. And it was fun to watch and then fun to see them say, oh, maybe that is okay after you coached them.
Yeah, yeah. And culture change is hard, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's the coaching, right? To remind people of why this bad news is good that you're getting it now.
Yeah, and the bottom line was that that release they were working so hard for, they got done on time, if not a little bit early, and more importantly, they see their way now to doing that on a more consistent basis. The confidence from where they were when we started with them to when they released that
Hmm.
was almost night and day, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, in fact, the VP that you mentioned in the previous, or the leader of that group you mentioned in the previous episode, one of her closing quotes here is that we were talking about how things went. She basically said that Agility IRL made a huge difference in how we work, right? It's just how they work is different now than how it used to be. It's more effective, it's better quality, it's more frequent releases, and they think differently. So that was, yeah, again, it was one of those really good engagements, really good leadership support, and a team that really ate it up.
And fun for us. We love to see that result and hope we can do that for some of the listeners sometime down the road.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks, Pat, for this little walk down memory lane, and talking about how, Agile, even in regulated industries, even in as tightly regulated as medical device, as it should be, you can apply Agile. You can make it work.
Absolutely. And look forward to more fun stories like this with you, Jeff.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us. Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Take 5 IRL podcast. If you like it, please go ahead and share it with someone, as well as like and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. We are available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. Also, leave us a comment or a suggestion for a future episode. Again, thanks for listening, and we look forward to you joining us next time on the Take 5 IRL podcast.